Peter, please take it away.
All right. Thanks, everyone. As I was saying before, what I'm going to try to do today is cover a variety of things relative to formula fields in SmartSuite. As many of you have probably heard, we've made a number of updates. So I want to show you some of the new features and functions, some of the good stuff that the product team has been working hard on. But I've also had a number of questions on just the basics. How do you get started? What is the best way to approach certain use cases and scenarios? So we'll start there for a few minutes, and then we'll gradually get a little bit more in-depth and sophisticated with some of the functions that we'll take a look at. Please, let's keep this interactive. As Rick was saying, enter your questions in the Q&A, and he'll keep me on task. Rick, please interrupt me when questions are coming in, and we will address the things that you want to know about. So I do have a number of things kind of pre-configured that I want to walk through in a little bit of detail as we get into things, but let's start from the basics. And to do that, and hopefully the demo gods are with me today, let's create a brand new workspace to show you how easy this is to get started. We'll create one from scratch. And let's just call this formula demo. And I want to show you, I'll try to give you a few tips and tricks on application building as we go along, because again, there's some techniques to make your life a little bit easier as you're setting up some of these common use cases. So one of the most common has to do with things like inventory and orders and things of that sort. So let's do that. Here's one trick. We're just going to clear the fields that we're displaying in our view and set up some things to allow us to start building up some formulas. So typical use case scenario, you want to track maybe, and of course my toolbar is right in the way. Let's track some orders. So what do we need for the basics of an order? We need a quantity. We need, let's find our currency field, and we'll do a unit price. And title. Of course, we can come in here and call this order one, but maybe that's not super convenient. So not formula related directly, but it's kind of adjacent. Remember that you can always auto-generate the title field value. So this is sort of a formula. It's a bit more limited in that it's just concatenating fields that you select from the application. But maybe we want to call this order something. Let's use our auto number field, which automatically increments a number and allows us to use that value. So instead of manually typing these in, I can just keep adding orders, and they fill in with their automatically generated number. We'll put in some quantities. And here's a trick too, while we're doing this. Remember that in Grid, it's got some Excel-like functions now, where if I highlight a number of fields, I can actually grab this handle here in the corner, if I can grab it. That a little bit easier. Let's put in some prices. You can also cut and paste. So Control C, Control V. I had a value in my buffer, of course. 97. So the first thing that we're going to want to do, obviously, is add these up. And to do that, let's create our first formula field. Call this total. And you've got a couple of options. So if you're just starting out and it's a basic scenario like this, where you've got a quantity and a price and you want to come up with a total value, you can use the simple mode. And this makes it really easy. I can select both of those fields. I can select the operator. I add my field, and it's going to automatically perform that calculation for me. Simple. If you want to do anything more significant than just this mathematical calculation, and you just have the basic math operators here, just click this Advanced Editor button. And what you can see is that it took those values and it put it into a formula that we can then edit. You can actually go back and forth. So if you've got a relatively simple formula, you can click in here, say, I want to round this, and I want to round it to a whole number maybe. I can update the field, and here we go. We have rounded our number. Now, you probably don't want to do that in this type of a calculation, so we could just flip it back, and that's gone. Now, one thing that we do is we're removing all of the other functions that you've added in here that don't fit into that simple editor. So keep that in mind when you flip back and forth and then save the field, it's going to lose any of that other stuff that you've added in. So just be aware as you're going through this that you may lose some of the additional functions that you've added here if you've gone in and modified in the advanced editor. Okay, so that's kind of step one. Just the basics, taking a couple of values and performing a simple function. Now, this isn't probably what your real life scenario looks like, because you've got these individual order items and they're part of a top level order. Maybe we've got a number of different things that you want to make as part of an order. So let's do this. Let's take this back to manual input. When I do that, by the way, what it's going to do is take the current calculated value and just insert it as text. So be aware of that. You can go back and forth between manual and auto-generated inputs, but you are going to just end up with whatever value is currently in there at the time that you make that change. So now that we've got this, I could rename these, this is a widget. This is something else. Let's add another table. We'll create it from scratch. Let's call this orders. And now we could call this one line items. You can also reorder these just by clicking and dragging. So you can put them in a logical order. Here again, let's clear our display, and we're going to add a linked record. And linked records factor in pretty heavily in a lot of formula calculations, and we'll get this configured just so that we can take a look at the ways that we can interact with items that are linked to your record and not directly in the record. So we've got an order. Now we've got this link to line items. And let's select a couple of those as being part of this order. And now I have these 3 items linked to those line items that I created before. The really neat thing, and where you start getting into some of the power of the formula field, and here we're going to need to use the advanced editor, are things that you can do across those linked records. And one of the first ones that you'll probably be interested in is sum. So this is going to make it real easy to sum up the total that we calculated in those individual line items up here at the order level. Now, one of the other things you'll want to know and take advantage of here when you're doing more advanced formula editing are the helpers that you've got below. We've got a reference for all of the different formula functions. And again, you can see some of these related record sorts and things that we'll get into here in just a few minutes, which we've recently added. But we're going to start out by just summing some of the items that we had in those linked items. Now, here's the other really powerful bit about the syntax of the formulas. And you'll notice that these are kind of Excel or Google Sheets like, but we've added a little bit of syntax that allows you to reference things that are on the other side of that linked record connection. So here I've got the link to line items, but line items itself is a separate table and it has all of these different values. When I type a period after this field name, I'm going to get a list, and you can see my display updated to show me all of the fields that are in the line items table. So I could reference unit price and, oh, hey, here's our total value. I can see that it's a formula, but I can use it in the formula through that linked record. So this is where things start to get really powerful, because now I'm summing up all of the values in this total field here at the order level. And that just gets us started. So we can do a number of different things. There are also roll-up fields and count fields that would allow you to just count these items, but you can do all of the same things in a formula, but you have more control. So let's actually
Peter, can I weave in some questions here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're stirring up quite a bit of interest on some things, and the one common denominator we're seeing in the questions would be in regards to the currency value, the dollar sign for that formula. So there's a question here around, shouldn't it maintain, Richard's asking, Richard Cross, shouldn't the dollar sign persist in the simple method? And then probably about 4 follow-up questions. How do I get that currency notated in front? I know we can use concat. Also recall a conversation recently where choosing that currency selector is on the roadmap.
It absolutely is. This is one of my personal pet peeves, that you don't have a way to format the numeric value. So what we're going to do is actually at the field level, allow you to come in and say how you want to display not just numbers, but dates as well, so that you've got more control over the output type. It's worth noting that when you create a formula, the formula itself, in all of the possible values it can generate, need to be the same type of value. And there are 3 basic types. There's text, there are dates, and there are numbers. So a formula is going to output one of those types. When you're using conditional logic and other things that are a little more advanced, all of the end results need to be of the same type. So if it generates a date, it always needs to generate a date. So that will allow us to come in and add a function that allows you to format that date or number just like you could. Let's go back to our line item. Here you have the currency selector and the precision and options and all of these things. We're going to bring that to the formula field to allow you to specify that. Same thing with date types. You may want to display just a short date, or you may want the elongated version. We're going to give you all of those options here shortly. Great question. And to Rick's point, it is possible, if you want to do it for display, you can, let's call this, we'll do formatted total. And what Rick was talking about is the concat function. Concat takes any of the values that are produced or grabbed from another field, and it puts them together as a string of text. So the unfortunate part right now about using something like a number or our formula field here that outputs a dollar amount, we can absolutely add the dollar symbol, just like this, but it turns it into text, which for display purposes isn't terrible. But if you use this in another formula, you're dealing with text now instead of a number. Now, I'm also going to show you some ways that you can deal with text and interpret it as a number, but we have to do a little manipulation to get rid of that pesky dollar symbol first. But you do have some flexibility to do this again for display purposes. Some people have two values just like this, and they hide the one that isn't formatted from the view so that you see the dollar symbol when it's displayed.
Nice. Thanks for that, Peter. So we're expecting next week on the formatting. Thanks for that. Um,
Absolutely.
if you could,
We will be thinking hard about it next week for sure.
love it, love it. If you could copy this and create a few records just to show, there's been a few asks as well about just showing the formatted total down at the bottom. So kind of using the field level summary, which I know we need a few fields to replicate.
Absolutely. So what we're talking about here is, let's say that we wanted to see what our average was for those amounts. So here down at the bottom of every grid view, you have this, what we call the aggregation column. And this just summarizes the information that's in the various fields up above in that column. So depending on the type of value, you'll see that for text values, it's a little different. You can say, hey, I want to know how many of these are filled, how many are empty, how many are no value. But when it's a number column, you've got quite a bit more information. You can see the range. You can see even things like standard deviation. Depending on your use case, you can pick the one that makes the most sense for you. Possibly
Yeah, that was a big unlock. Big unlock for me. Mary, Aaron, feel free to chime further onto your questions. Just want to make sure that covered it. So Mary asked, please extend the total to tally the totals. And then Aaron's asking, how do we make a total dollar figure? So that could either be here down at the aggregation header, footer. Didn't know that's what we called it. Now I do. It could have been that. It could have also been the summary that Peter showed before, where we're pulling information across and either doing a roll up or using a formula to sum or aggregate those totals.
Yeah, and I think what the question's probably going to is, all right, I've got a whole bunch of orders and now I want to see everything that relates to quarter one, right? There are a couple of different ways to do that. You could either, let's say that we had a value. Let's do a single select value and just do Q1, Q2. We'll add that field. Say that this value is Q1, this one's Q2. You can group. And let's find our, oh, I just left it single select. So now you can see that we've got this footer rolling things up by quarter. So that's an easy way to do it. If you just have certain values, you can see that they'll be grouped and you get that number right there. If you need more than that, let's say we've got a whole bunch of these and we need to do some more of a roll-up report. One technique that I've seen people use is just linking to another app and creating sort of aggregations for whatever it is you want to report by. So the way that you would do that is now you're adding another linked record field. In this case, we're going to point at quarter. And instead of just that list item, I keep covering up my buttons. Now I've got a link to quarter. And over here in quarter, if I clear this and I see linked orders, here I've got my order. You could put a formula here and roll up for everything that was linked to Q1. So that's a slightly more complex way to go about this. But if you really have kind of a data organization and breakdown need that takes it to this level, this is a convenient way to do it, just with another linked record that groups it by whatever the thing is that you want to report by.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
Follow-up request to that from Mary. I think that should cover it there. Follow up, more a product request here. The aggregation line does not print anywhere. Asking if that's going to change in terms of, I guess, exportability of that.
Good point. Yeah, that's something that I'll talk with the product team about as we get a little more sophisticated in the way that we're doing some of the view exports and prints. Having that as an option, I could see being really handy. Great idea.
Thanks for that comment, Mary. Yep.
Okay. Any other questions related to this kind of basic scenario?
We're rolling up a few. Let me see which ones apply to this. I'll try to weave them in when it makes sense.
Okay.
Just calling out, Brian dropped in the chat there a link to a formula solution, which is all of our formula function operators. Really handy one to bookmark. I use it all the time. It's a solid guide. Just breaks down with examples and explanations of those. Benjamin asked that question, so definitely check that out. Bookmark that in the chat. Adrian's asking about when you sum up, can you link it to a client?
You could absolutely link it to a client. Again, this is, I picked the wrong one. I call this formula demo. Yeah, you typically in this type of a structure, you would have another table that, and it may or may not be in the same solution. Just a reminder, you can do linked records across solutions. You would probably have a client here on the order. So instead of, let's remove this from display and we'll add another linked record. Actually, I generally like to have it linked from this side. We can link to the order. And they can have multiple. And I'll put myself as a client and I placed this order. Now you've got a link to all of the individual orders that have been placed by that client, as well as the line item. So you're linked in this order, client to order to line item, and then potentially even to quarter. So a lot of possibility there. Again, you can do roll-ups, you can do any kind of formulas in here against the items that are in the order or the aggregated values that are in that order. And it is certainly possible to have more segmentation and roll-ups, and maybe you have a client type. These are gold clients and silver clients or whatever. You can do all of that type of organization and display of that information right here. All right. Okay. As I mentioned, I've got a few things preset that we can kind of run through to show you a few of the newer things that are available as well. And then just to expand on some of the configuration. This is very similar to what I was showing before. And, again, with a larger number of items here, you get some more interesting data in your roll-up values. So you can see, the average order quantity was 31, and the sum of these orders is $18,600. So makes it quick and easy to see that type of information. Let's get into some of the type-specific functions that we've added. As I mentioned, we have a whole variety of formulas available to you to kind of manipulate these different things and see or get at the data that you want. So here, when you scroll down in your formula editor, you're going to see a list of all of the available formula functions. And many of these apply to different types. We've added a whole variety of mathematical operators, and I want to show you how you can use those to do some pretty interesting things. Things like floor. If you don't know what floor is all about, you can always click on the function name, and then here in the function reference, it's going to give you an overview of what the syntax looks like, a description of what this is. So it's going to be rounded down to a particular stated significance. And you get more information about what that's all about. If you keep scrolling, you'll see a variety of examples and what that function would return with certain inputs. So this is basically, 15.5 returns 5. Here, we're just taking that number and applying floor to it. And here you can see that value represented as it's consuming this number value. You can do the same thing with things like average. And you can get even more exciting by doing things like in this example, more of a financial type of use case. This is calculating future value of a loan. So here we've got the inputs to that calculation. We've got a principal amount, and that's a currency field. We've got an interest rate, a number of periods, and then the number of years for the loan. And if any of you do Excel formulas of this type, some of this will be familiar to you. You're taking the principal amount. And here's another function that we've added, power, which raises a number to a particular exponent. You can state what kind of precision you want in the number as well. It defaults to 2. And here you can see it's doing that future value based on a number of periods calculation. There's a different one to do it on a continual basis, but this one uses a set number of periods, and you can see the resulting future value. So we've added a variety of operators of this type just for these types of use cases where you need more advanced mathematical operators. We've got things like square root, ceiling, floor, logarithm. You can do modulus. All of that type of stuff is now available to you. And this is just one example of how that works. All right.
Perfect. Happy to take on a few more questions, Pete.
Sure. Yeah. If we have anything specific to numeric operations, that'd be great. I'll roll into text operators next.
Yeah, there are quite a few. I'm trying to take note. Let's knock out
Okay.
some of the kind of earlier ones, and then we'll pause, get back to your flow, and then I'll bring some of these other ones in.
Sure.
Shafraz is asking here. This one's a little detailed. I have 2 tables with identical data that are updated periodically. When updating the 2 tables, if there is a record or field that does not match the records in the other table, I need to copy the unmatched records to a new table using a formula. Is this possible using formulas? If so, how? I think we might need automations for this, but
you're going to need automations to do that. You could use an automation to find records that don't match some list of criteria. How we would exactly do this particular one, I'd have to dig into it a little bit to see what the possibilities are. But the thing with doing things through a formula, if you have multiple tables, you need a link between those records. So at this time, we don't have a dynamic linked record type of capability where it can imply a linkage or create that linkage automatically. Those things have to be done through automations. And automations does have a find function where you're able to find records that match certain criteria. And when you set that up, this is actually something that's brand new as well. You can either find multiple records or say that you're trying to find a single record. And what are the criteria that you want to use to go match and, locate that record in the other table. Some sort of flow involving that would probably have to be involved to address that scenario.
Nice one. Patrick's asking here, can you use formulas to change the background color of a cell or the font based on a condition? Which would be most likely Spotlight. I don't know if that can be done.
What you would do is configure Spotlight to actually do the highlighting for you. What we can do, and this is another area where we've changed a little bit. We've made it easy for you to highlight things based on select list type fields. So single, multiple, select, and status. Now you can highlight just kind of automatically based on those values. Or, and this is kind of the traditional highlight definition, you can use values in the field to actually set conditions and then highlight either the field itself or the entire record. So that's where, if you wanted this to change to a different color when the future value, let's say that here I want future value is greater than 12,000. I want to turn the field a particular color. And you can see in the background as I did that, the field just changed color. So that's how you'd approach that.
Nice, very good. Let's take one more here and then I'll let you get back into it. Nina's asking here, and this is one that we covered briefly, but I think it's critical that people understand this component of formulas, the dot or the period notation. She's asking, is there a way to use a lookup value in a formula?
Yes, you can. So just for people who aren't as familiar with it, what a lookup value is when you have a linked record, this is a lookup value. This is a field called lookup, and basically you're looking through that linked record field and you're pulling the value or values from the linked records in a particular field into this record. So yes, you could either reference this lookup value in the formula itself, or you can point directly at the target field itself through that linked record. The caveat is that if you've set the linked record field to be able to have multiple values, when you configure it, you can specify whether you want one or many values. So this allow linking to multiple records option says, okay, we're going to have an array of values, so a whole list of values. In that case, when you reference the subfields, the fields in that linked record, you need to use some sort of what we call aggregation functions. So those are things like sum for numeric values or average, concat for text values, or something like this. We have recently added some features for dealing with multiple values, specifically in the context of linked records, where you want to bring back some of the values, but you want them formatted. The thing about concat is it takes the text and it puts it together. And if you have a list of things, it doesn't know how to handle that list. So what array unique, or we actually have a number of array functions. If I can get them to pop up here. We've got array join, which just takes any records that you're referencing here through that linked record and joins them with a particular bit of text, in this case, a comma followed by a space, or array unique says, I only want to get the unique values for type and join them and display them here. So this is kind of cool in that what it allows you to do is, say you had a list of different project type or task types associated with a project. And that's exactly what I have here. So I want to see what types are involved in any of the tasks that are linked to this current project. I can see that I've got design and development tasks that are selected. And there are many of these. As you can see, there are 4 values over here, but only 2 displayed in unique. That's because you've got duplicates of either design or development, but it's only going to show them to you once so that you've got a short summarized list. So that's one of the things that we've just recently added, and it gives you some more flexibility for this type of workflow. In this function as well, I'll also highlight that it's got an optional additional parameter, a third value that you can specify that says that you only want to return a certain number of items. So if I wanted this unique list or even just a list of anything that's there, but I only want the top 10, I can specify that in the formula and you're only going to get 10 values displayed. All right.
Love it. I'm going to weave one more in because I think it's
Sure.
in line with something you were planning to share. A really good question from Ben here, and one that we get commonly with CRM use cases. Can you show us a formula or a way to show when a record was changed or what has changed in a record? Sorry.
You can, yes. So we've recently added, and I think I've got one here somewhere. Yep. You can look at individual fields and see who last modified it. We've got a couple of functions along this line. So you can get by or you can get time. So this is going to give you the date stamp of the last modification of the checklist field. And in this case, last modified by is going to tell you the name of the user that last modified that individual field. Right at the moment, it's field specific. So we've got information about when that field was last changed and by whom. So you can display that information and see, hey, Peter was the last person to update the checklist. Or I could get the date, the time and date stamp of that last modification. So at the moment, there isn't a way to look at, you can do last modified it by for the entire record. But if you wanted to kind of track multiple fields, you'd have to set those up individually in the formula to, kind of figure out what that list of people involved in those changes was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ben, more broadly at a record level, you'll see that in the activity history, but there's no way to pull it into a formula currently.
That's right.
All right, plenty more in here, Pete, but let's, I know you've got some other exciting things you'd like to share.
Okay. Yeah, just kind of bouncing around since we're over here looking at checklists, I wanted to point out another thing that we have implemented. So checklists, for those of you who are not familiar with them, are kind of a sub list of items within a record. So if you have a more complex set of related data, you probably want a linked table through a linked record. But if you just have a task-based, did you do X, Y, and Z? Checklist gives you that functionality. You can come in here and say that individual things are done or not done. And you also have the ability to assign them a due date. And finally, you can assign them to an individual person. To do that, we've also, or to help along these lines, we've added a checklist count formula function. And what this lets you do is look into that checklist and see what status values or people and assignments or due dates are related to that checklist. Let me show you how this works. So checklist count gives you a count of the checklist items that match a particular set of criteria. And those criteria, we've again used this dot notation to allow you to look at this checklist and say, hey, I just want to look at the assignee. I just want to look at the due date, or I wanted to look at the completion status. I had completion status here. This is how this was set up. And you can say true or false for completed to filter on that value. Let's change this. And let's say that we care about due date. And I want to see anything that due date is less than, and here I'll use a formula function called now. And what now does is it represents the current date and time right now. So I want to see any checklist item that has a due date prior to right now. So it's in the past, it's overdue. And when I do that, it's going to recalculate and tell me, hey, one of these things has a due date in the past. That can just be really useful for keeping count of things. You know, you see the checklist completion status, but it allows you to come in here and construct some things that are a bit more granular to give you a count of items in particular status conditions. So really handy for doing things related to project management, just allowing you to look into that field and seeing what state those individual items are. Because previously, when you would reference a checklist in a formula, you just get a number. You get a total number of items in that checklist. This way, we're letting you break it down and see exactly, you know, what's been happening in that checklist. Okay. Any related questions, Rick?
There are several. For what you'd like to cover, though, how much time do you think you need? We can go rapid fire on some of these questions.
Okay,
If you
yeah,
like.
let me just show a few additional things, and then we'll circle back and spend the rest of the time on just user questions. Highlighting a few things that we've added relative to text operators. Here I've got some sample data where I've got a formatted piece of text, and this comes up all the time where you have an ID number or an order number or something that has it's got a known format, but you need just a part of that number or, you know, sequence of characters. In this case, I've got a bit of text that has some dashes in it. We have added a couple of functions that makes manipulating strings just a little bit easier. First is find. There's also rfind. What find does is it finds the position in the text of the first instance of whatever text you specify. So in this case, I want the offset of where in this bit of text is that character, starting at 0, working its way up. Or I believe it reports back a -1 if it's not found at all. Same with rfind. Rfind is almost the same thing, except it's telling you the last occurrence of this bit of text in the target text. So what that lets you do is get a substring, which is really handy in that, see, in this case, I wanted to extract my value from this formatted string. You can put all of this together with mid. And mid is our version of a substring function that allows you to say, okay, I want to look at the text that's in the field called text. I want to start one position in front of where it finds that dash. And then I'm going to calculate how long, you know, how many characters I need by taking where the last instance of that dash is minus the offset of the other find. I know getting your head wrapped around this is a little interesting, but basically what the midpoint function is doing is saying, okay, I want to start here and I want the next number of characters. So since we've found the location of both of these, we're just doing a little bit of math to say, okay, I want to start right here and I need that next, what is it, 7 characters. So that's what we're doing here. And when you have 2 known values, you can easily combine these things to get just the bit in between those separators and use it in another formula or whatever is appropriate. You can see this is the output from the write function. And what write does is it gives you the last number of characters starting from the right-hand side of a string of text. So if you want the last 4 digits of a social security number, you could do that. There are a variety of things. And then this last example, I'm just demonstrating that you can back into this too. You don't have to use any of that. You could actually use replace. And this is just to show you that you can nest functions. You could basically replace the output of a replace and continually just remove more text from that string. So there's a lot possible. We don't really have time to dig into the depths of exactly how this works. Just know that, in this replace, I'm actually using the output of another replace that's using the output of what's coming from the right-hand side of the string. So you can nest all of these functions and use them in that way to continue refining your result. All right, just pointing out real quickly, this has been out a while, but just want to highlight that date diff is really useful. Date diff gives you the ability to get the number of what I'll call time units in minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, or years that exist between these 2 dates. So again, really useful in project management. Also wanted to give you some sense of where you can go with this. There's also a date add function where you can add a number of units in whatever measure of time you want to a particular date. So if you want to add 1 day to a date, that's simply done with date add. And then all of this, there are other date operators available that just give you things like, tell me the day portion of my date. And that can be really useful when you do more complicated things. This one, I had to have some formula eye candy. This is something called Zeller's congruence. It's a formula that will calculate the day of the week for any date. And again, I'm not going to drag you through the details of this, but just to show you that it's possible to really nest things and do quite a bit of complexity within a formula. This is using a bunch of our new features. It uses modulus, it uses the floor function. One other thing I did want to point out, and I mentioned it earlier, but just to highlight it, this formula actually requires a portion of the year. And the way that it's formatted here, I have to get the year using this write statement. So I'm getting the 2 characters at the end of the year. The problem with that is this formula didn't work in the past because this gets returned as text. Write returns the text 2 characters from the start of the string value of the date as returned by year. So number just tells it, take that text and turn it right back around into a number. So again, this is an example of nesting those functions where I'm getting the year from the date, I'm getting the right-hand side of it, which turns it into text, and then I'm turning it back into a number with the number function. And it just, it actually does accept two values. You can tell it a precision. So instead of doing a round as yet another level, although I'm doing it at the very top level here, you can actually tell number to give you 2 decimal places precision if you wanted to. In this case, I'm actually telling it no decimal places because what I want is just the 2-digit end digits of the year because that's what's required in this formula. This formula actually also uses conditional logic. If is the most popular, where you're evaluating a criteria. So in this case, this particular function requires us to do something different if it's January or February. And I can tell if we're in January or February pretty easily because the month value of your date is either going to be 1 or it's going to be 2. Otherwise, I just use this regular version of the formula, but it requires you to basically do some additional math if it happens to be January or February to get this to work out right. But that's the nice thing with if, you can just put that condition here and then say, here's the version of the function I need to run if it happens to be January. Here's the version if it's February, and otherwise, the last condition is always the otherwise do this. And that's exactly what we do here. And then the whole thing is rounded. So you can put the output of that if into another statement. You can even have an if feed into an if, and you see that here, where I have a nested if as the second output of the first if. So you can chain things along and do some really interesting things. Rick, I'm sure that there were a question or two around.
Amazing. Yeah. I presume there's a range of folks here from just getting their feet wet in formulas to borderline
Yep.
certified experts. So hopefully that little deep dive into the weeds from Peter there is wetting the palate for the more complex formula users. As we're getting to the top of the hour here, so we've got 19 questions stacked up. We'll try to work our way through these. We will go past the top of the hour, but for folks that need to jump off for something else, we'll be sending out a recording here shortly, either by the end of the day or first thing tomorrow morning. We'll also send along with that a link to the formula solution that Brian shared earlier, as well as this day of the week formula that Peter shared and any other resources that we think are relevant. So keep an eye out for that email. It'll be a nice little guide to continuing your formula journey. But thanks all that need to drop off.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Let's
All right.
tackle some of these.
Yeah, just one other thing I wanted to mention,
Please.
just as kind of wrapping up this whole crazy numeric day of the week. The output of this is a number, and it's from 0 to 6, representing Sunday through Saturday. Just wanted to highlight something for even the formula veterans. This is kind of, it's often overlooked. We have a case function that allows you to match on one condition and then have, or specify a condition. So here I want to look at that number value of the output of that formula. And then I have subsequent matches and results. So I'm telling it what to do if that number is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm matching it up with the day. And then this whole thing is wrapped in another if. And it's saying if it's not null, then do this case. If the date value is null, display no date. So the is not null is handy here because, as I will show you, you still get a numeric value from this formula, even with a null value and date, just because of the way that the day function returns as 0. So when it's input into that same formula, we could probably handle it in the formula, but even easier, I'm just looking at the state saying, oh, it's empty. So I'm going to say no date instead of the day of the week. All right.
Awesome.
Questions?
Yeah, this could have easily been a 2-3 hour session here, but appreciate all the
Excellent.
ground you covered, Pete.
For sure.
Let's get into it. Faster than Mahomes in the red zone. Chiefs
There
think
you
win it.
go.
Okay, let's get after it. So, Lace or Lasse, apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. What's the best practice for formulating calculations from data located under separate solutions? So, for example, you have a CRM with accounts, you have financials, including invoicing. If I wanted to calculate percentage of customers paying their invoices on time, presume
Yep,
that would be with a linked record, pulling in
it is.
information to use. Yeah.
So it all comes down to it's more of a data design or a schema design question because, as I mentioned, you have to have that linked record connection between those entities in the various solutions. So, if this wasn't webinar, Feb7 formulas, and instead we're here in orders and we've got customers in a separate solution, you can still have that linked record to the customer right here and perform that calculation. So it's all about having and kind of cascading some of those values. So, when we take a look at orders and line items, you would want to do things like have this line item total rolled up into an order total. And then maybe this order has a linked record to a customer that's located in a different solution. The customer could then have a total of the totals. So you can have those values propagate themselves, and the calculation engine performs them in a way that the least dependent value goes first and it works its way up to the dependent values so that you get an accurate count from that whole chain of rollups. So it's kind of the process under the covers is a little complicated, but we ensure that those values propagate themselves and everything that needs to be recalculated gets recalculated.
Love it. Very good. Paul's asking here, I manage a scheduling calendar of a busy rental venue. The cardinal sin is an accidental double booking.
Yep.
Question, which date time functions do we use to write a formula field that can in turn be used as a triggering field in an automation which immediately catches any overlap before a rental contract is created? It's pretty specific, but
Yeah, I don't know that there's one specific answer to that. You can one of the things that's been added to automations is the ability to look at things and let's say when a record is updated, let's look at the due date start. Now, you would want to do something where, well, in this particular case too, he's got a specific date. So what you could do is, as opposed to doing that, just you'd have some criteria that says when maybe it's on matches condition, when a certain set of things match and it's ready for scheduling. Maybe I want to go find anything in my and I don't really have an appropriate in my tasks application where the date matches the target date. All of that's after some action though. So we'd really have to think through what makes the most sense from a scheduling perspective. It actually does give me the opportunity to mention that one of our major product initiatives for this quarter is working on a more formalized scheduling function within SmartSuite itself. The more advanced users probably have already seen Gantt view and the dependency field. On top of that, what we're going to do is add resource scheduling. So we're going to be extending user profiles. We're going to be able to look at individual users and their time allocation and be able to have a view, hopefully, that works right alongside of Gantt chart, where you can schedule resources for those tasks with mindfulness of their existing scheduling situation. So more on that's coming soon. I think that there are still some things that we can do in the shorter term with a combination of formulas and automations to make your life a little easier as you're going through scheduling, and possibly even to visualize some of these things. But we'd have to look deeper into the specifics of that scenario to get a more accurate answer, I suppose.
Perfect. Well said. Well said. A few others here.
Hmm?
Mike Jungers, just to call out, roll up totals to the same table using single selects and linking. Views make it really easy to see just the totals without creating another table.
Mhm.
So just a nice comment there.
Yep, roll-ups can be really handy. We've got a number of things that just make it easy to add in visual elements to make things sort of come to life. This is an example. I was trying to think of how would I use this function? We added a function that repeats a bit of text or whatever you've put as a value in this first part of the function. What came to mind is, hey, we can say how many times. So that can be a dynamic value. So in this case, I'm taking account of the items and I'm just making sort of a little mini graph, if you will, kind of like a sparkline that just gives me an idea of, okay, how many items did I add to this order? And I can see the number of green circles equals the number of items that are in this particular order. So just handy little visual tricks to make your interface a little more interesting.
That's awesome. Timmy's asking about the frequency in which fields or formulas are updated, the data that they're drawing from.
So formulas are updated at the time of the save. The exception comes in when you get into dates that use that now function that I was showing before. When you have a now involved, because that obviously we can't recalculate it every second because we would be recalculating tens of millions of records every second. What happens, and let's just add a now. What that does is it shows me my now current time. You'll see that it pops up a little help icon. What it's telling me is because it has that computed now value, and this particular account is on an enterprise plan, it recalcs every 2 hours. So every 2 hours we'll go through and anything with that now function will get updated. And then any of its dependencies get updated. 2 hours is the fastest for now. That's on the enterprise plan. Pro plan, it's every 4 hours, and team and other plans recalculate every 8 hours. So we still want to, we want to recognize when that value is changed, and that'll trigger automations and that type of thing. And that's really the reason why we do it on a scheduled basis, is to recognize that we've hit some value that alerts based on the computed now in the context of the formula.
Nice one. Derek's question is in regards to the rating, using a rating field in a formula. When a rating field is left unrated, if you use a count formula, it is not counted, but if you calculate the average, it calculates it as a 0. Is this how it should work?
That's probably right. I mean, that's what it's currently doing. And knowing that, I think that we can kind of work around things. We may give you a little bit more latitude in the future just to say exactly how you want it treated. But let's see, rating. Rating and vote probably work similarly. Yeah, so you're going to get the numeric value. So we're saying that, yeah, so it's calculating no value there. We could probably do some things with sum if. Sum if is another function that allows you a bit more flexibility on when to calculate something. And, I could probably do is not null rating. And then we have an average if as well. So through some combination, we can probably back you into the calculation that you're trying to get, if you wanted to leave out those blank values.
Thanks for that one, Derek. We have Richard with a question here around the system field last update has two values, on and by, which can be extracted using the SmartSuite API, but only the date is utilized in the SmartSuite UI. Is there a formula which could be used to create a field showing the updated by value in the field created?
Let's see. So last updated date. Yeah, what we have to do is just expand it with, again, with dot notation. With the last updated date and time values, you can definitely do it. You could probably even do it for a system field, using the last modified time. Yeah, that's not going to let you use the system field. But yeah, what we need to do is just add in expandability for the last updated. So that's a great point.
Yeah, nice call out, Richard. Nina, as a follow-up to her question previously, getting more specific here. Thanks, Nina, for sharing more. In my use case, I want to use only the value that I've looked up based on a set criteria. Example, I'm looking up a value, but only the record that is active. And then just the value of the active link record will appear in the lookup field. This is the value I want to reference in a formula.
Okay, so let's go back to our orders. So you've got, this is arbitrary data, but let's say you wanted to, let's change one of these statuses to complete. Show our status. Oh, in the line items. So are we saying that you want to
so let's say take from one of those link record lookup values, only want to show the one which is status complete and show a component of that information.
So are we talking a numeric value, or is this some other component?
Possibly numeric. Let's use that as an example. Nina, I'm happy to get time with you after this as well to dig in specifically.
Yeah, because if it's numeric, we could definitely do like a sum if across that linkage and put the status condition as the criteria. So if we take a look at sum if, we've got the criteria, and then we've got the field that we want to sum. So here we could do our items, and then the status field is equal to complete. And then what I want to sum is items and their unit price, or whatever, or line item total maybe. So that limits it down to just the ones in that status. There you see the difference in the value that's returned. So depending on the use case, that in combination maybe with some of the elements in the array manipulation, we're showing that we have that array unique feature that we may be able to use if it fits the scenario. Yeah, I'd have to dive a little deeper into what the specifics are, but we have quite a few more tools now to get us into a situation where we can pull just those specific values. By using the number of items that are returned in that array. And which reminds me, you can also do, there's a sort function. This is really neat in that what you can do is say that I want to sort all of these related records. Here's a particular field I want to return. Here's the field to sort by, and then what the sorting order is. Where this is useful is, say you've got a bunch of status reports linked to a project, and you want the status of the last one. You could do that by ordering by date and saying, give me the status condition of just the last status report.
Very interesting. Nice. Nina, I think that possibly answers, but again, feel free to follow up. Benjamin is asking about the limitations around how many formula fields can be used in a table.
Yes, I know it's caused a little bit of controversy. It's something that the product team's taking a look at. Let me describe, and for those of you who don't know, we're trying to limit the number of more complex field types, things like formula, to a number around 30. Right now it's set at 30, and that causes some issues for people who are used to adding dozens of formulas for various things. For one, we're trying to make it possible to do more in single formulas. And that's why we've added a number of these functions that allow you to do things in a single formula that normally would have taken you multiple steps. So that's one. The flip side of it is overall application performance. So if you have 100 formulas in your table, and it's linked to another table that has 100 formulas, and you've got thousands of records in each one, and say, a couple dozen linked record connections between each one of the records, you can very quickly get into millions of recalculations for a single table when you make an update, which is something that we're just trying to find ways to encourage people to think about the structure of these things and do it in a way that maybe doesn't require so much recalculation. So it's definitely an open topic for discussion. Please send me your feedback. Partners, definitely hit me up in partner Slack, but we'll work through and find reasonable accommodation here at the end of the day, I'm sure.
Perfect. Patrick, a question around, will checklist have the update to where you can send existing checklist items to another record? Currently, you can only specify new items in the automation manually. Also, if you do it that way, if there are existing items, it will add it on top of them instead of override. But if the checklist could match and send, then it would be equal.
Yeah, well, I'll have to break that one down a little further. Being able to, right now you have to explicitly say that you want to append a particular item in that automation. We're looking for a variety of things to add in that allow you to be more flexible. One of those, again, more on the automation side than formulas, is we're going to add an append where it's applicable, or a remove value option, which has been often requested as well. In the course of that, we'll have to evaluate each individual field type. And for checklists in particular, I don't see a reason why we wouldn't be able to just take some arbitrary value and append it to a different one. So that's a case that we can definitely evaluate as we're implementing that feature.
Cheers, Patrick.
While we're talking about checklists, the other thing that comes to mind is I had a couple of questions that came in through other channels about sub items. First off, sub items is going to be converted in the future. We're working on it now. We're changing it into essentially the same thing as a linked record with a table structure that just isn't displayed like a regular table. It'll kind of be an embedded table. That being said, you do currently have the capability of using many of the fields that are in sub-items in a formula through that sub-item field, just like it was a linked record. So like in this example, I'm summing the numbers that are actually in sub-items in that record. And in this case, I'm doing an array join on those values, and all those values are just right here in these two sub-item records. So that can be done currently. Current sub-item is, it's not very flexible and it's a little clunky. It's even harder when you're trying to manipulate it through the API. I've written a bunch of code samples to try to show people how to do it, and it's not intuitive. So we're just going to make it act like an embedded table, and we'll have a lot more flexibility going forward.
Awesome. Getting close to the end here. Richard's asking if you could just show again the formula for last modified by. You said you could display who made the change across the whole record rather than just a particular field. How would you do that?
Well, the last updated value is in the context of a formula, it's field specific. So the last modified by will give you who modified the field last. Last updated itself contains who updated the record last. And that's again, this gives you information about the person and the date. The frustration right at the moment is just being able to use the value of that last updated in the calculation itself. So we just need to be able to expand that field with our dot notation to allow you to get at the name and the date separately.
Got it.
Right
Okay.
at the moment, you just get the date.
Nice. Ria's asking here, did you already mention something about regex with the rfind function?
Rfind does it does a limit. It's not regex, but it does have some limited matching capability. And I've got a little snippet, not to take up more time here, but I'll post it on the user community and in our partner community. So it's got some limited, not regex, but some matching capabilities. Like you can specify a variety of options that it should match in a particular character. True regex functions are coming. They're in the next wave, where you'll be able to write actual regular expressions, match the text and extract and do all of that kind of fun stuff. So coming soon.
Very cool. Thanks for that question. Let's see, last few. Sacha's asking for some reason I have duplicates in my text titles, even though I set it to not allow duplicates. Is there a way to remove duplicates using a formula or some other way? You probably use. Go ahead.
There is a way, not through a formula, other than recalculating a formula. If something's gotten in an odd state and you've been back and forth between modes, sometimes just having it recalculate the auto-generated title will do it for you. But if you're worried about duplicate records, we have a new automation that I'll highlight just briefly, that you would generally do this on record creation, where you can say that you want to merge records. And technically we're labeling this as beta, although it's working, and it's working well for a bunch of folks. What you have to do is you have to tell it what makes it unique. And typically, you're using this, the use case it's built for is like contacts, where you've got maybe a name and an email, possibly a phone number that you'd list here. And then what do you want to do when you get a record that matches an existing record? Do you want to replace values? In certain cases, you can append, and we're expanding the number of field types that you can append to. Already it does list types and text types and that kind of thing. Or you can ignore the value and just leave what was originally in the record itself. So this would be my recommended way to go about deduplicating, especially if it's something like a contact list where you've got well-structured data, you know what you're looking for, you're matching on email and saying, I only want one Peter at smartsuite.com. I'm just going to merge them into the one with that matching email and, have the aggregation in some cases of the values.
Now, Peter, if someone's left with a potential set of dupes that they need to go through after the fact, could they use the automation trigger? Let's say they created a field that was a yes, no field, and they made the trigger when matches yes. If you went and switched everything to yes, would that go through and dedupe everything that's in there currently?
Yeah, you can, the first time that it runs and you get any match on that email, it's going to kind of match them all down and it goes with the oldest record. So yes, that is possible. And yeah, if there are more questions about that, please hit us up either in Intercom or preferably on the community site so everyone can benefit from it. If you've got a particular scenario you want to know how to handle, we will walk you through it.
Cool. Okay, tip of the iceberg here. There's a few requests for getting a copy of this wizardry, this amazing solution here. Is this something that I know there's just a bunch of test things in here, but there's a lot of great examples that people might want to follow around with. Would you be comfortable sharing out some version of this, Peter?
Sure. I will. I'll do a couple of things. I'll take some of the more interesting formulas that were used here and just put them in a community post. And then I'd be happy to share this the solution with everyone as well, so you can see the sample data, that kind of stuff. I'll try to clean it up just a little bit. So we've been kind of all over the place, but label things so you know what you're looking at, and I'd be happy to publish that as well. And even probably better is Brian's reference. He's already got a shared solution that has literally every formula with examples and all of that kind of good stuff. That's a great resource.
Absolutely. Yep. And again, we'll be sharing that after the fact in follow-up email. Last two, Rusty is asking, when you went into that more complicated formula, I can't recall the name, where you were parsing out, basically looking at the dashes and then finding like to the right. Yeah. This here. He's asking, how would you find a substring if you had multiple dashes? Let's say you had 4 or 5. How would you find substring between 3 and 4? So if there were more than 2 dashes and you wanted to say, I want to find the substring between the 3rd and the 4th, is that possible?
It is. Basically, what you have to do is whittle down the string, kind of outside dashes in, which is much more like what I'm doing here with multiple replaces. You would use that first strategy to identify the position of the outermost dashes, get the text inside, and basically do the same thing again. And you can do that with a series of replaces and finds. And it may take a little bit of doing what I do when I'm setting up more complicated versions. And that's why you see some of these components is I'll do multiple formulas at first that just do a part of it and kind of start to break the string down. And once I've got it refined to the point where I'm getting exactly my value, and say my value had some inner value, then I'd use that in subsequent formulas, and then at the end kind of consolidate them together so I'm only using one. It just, coming right out of the gate and trying to just type into the editor something like this, it gets confusing even if you do this all the time. What I do recommend are, for really complicated stuff, go to an external text editor. There's a freebie one called Notepad++ that I like quite a bit, that has some formatting and it finds matching parentheses and that kind of stuff. Visual Studio Code is a free editor that does the same thing. So you may get beyond the the utility of our built-in editing when you get into the really super nested stuff, like the one that I showed with calculating the day of week. That gets into quite a bit of stuff, and it's possible to do, but it's hard to do just directly in the inline editor.
Gold. Okay, final question. This is an application question, a specific one, but could be relevant for a bunch of folks. Federico's asking, resetting the stage first. Imagine I have a price list table with different prices of the same product, with every price valid from one date to another. How to create a formula that caught the right price for orders made in different dates.
It would depend somewhat on the structure of that data. We could probably do a sum if to look at a date range, but again, if I could ask, maybe post that question back in the community, and that'd give me the opportunity to see the structure and the type of data, and we can see if there's a way to back into it for you.
Yeah, I'm curious on this one too. I can visualize it, but cleanest way to do it. Well, here we are. We still have a strong group going, and thank you all for the bonus time, sharing this extra time with us today on this Wednesday. As always, your questions, your engagement is what makes this so exciting for us. And I think Landon at one point had called out our product roadmap. So feedback.smartsuite.com. Jump in there, search for formulas, search for specific things you like, and make sure you upvote them. Not only will it help us to prioritize by rising the cream to the crop, so to speak, but it'll also ensure that you're getting emails as we move these new features through our development cycle. So thanks all again. Thanks, Peter, for a brilliant session. I know we're just getting into some of the starts of what we're looking to do here with formulas, and everyone enjoy the rest of your days.
More coming soon. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate
Take care
it.
all. Cheers.